Welcome to the Cambridge Financial Podcast with Bert Salazar, CEO at Cambridge Financial Partners, LLC. This podcast is all about tax-preferred retirement planning, economics, financial risk management, and achieving a risk-free and successful financial life. Now, your host, Bert Salazar. Bert Salazar.
Hey, good day, everyone. Welcome to another Your Tax-Free Life podcast. This is episode 76, so we're fast approaching episode number 100. So again, I want to thank you all for being here with me once again this week. And today we're going to touch bases on the 8 deadly sins of retirement. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I do in every workshop that I conduct is I always give an analogy of climbing Mount Everest when it comes to retirement planning and retirement distribution planning. And, you know, I talk about the differences between climbing the mountain and then coming down the mountain. And sadly enough, I heard over the weekend that 11 people have died so far in the last 2 weeks, either climbing or descending the mountain. So that's a major issue for those that are trying to get to the top of the summit when it comes to climbing Mount Everest. And for many of you that are trying to reach the summit of retirement, obviously there are 8 deadly sins that I'm going to be touching upon today, which I think you're going to find very interesting from a business perspective. So just sit back, enjoy, and first of all, I hope that all of you had a great Memorial Day weekend. My family and I spent a weekend in the Keys, in the Florida Keys, so we had a really good time. And, you know, obviously we got a lot of sun and did a little bit of fishing and had some good quality time with the family. But today is Tuesday, so it's back to work and back to provide all of you with as much education as we possibly can. So again, there are 8 deadly sins of retirement that I want to touch upon today. The first one would be not saving enough. And I think the challenge is that most Americans are spenders, not savers. You know, we live in a country that we do have the luxury to have the very best, and some of us have a tendency to buy the very best. Others tend to live at a better rate or a lower rate. But at the end of the day, my recommendation to all of you is you should live anywhere between 1 to 2 steps below your capabilities. Because if you live right up to the very edge and you spend as much money as you possibly can during your life, then chances are you're not going to be able to save accordingly in order to mitigate the longevity of retirement, and most important, having enough money set aside so you don't run out of money before you run out of life. Now, for those of you that may not know this, savings from an economic standpoint is nothing more and nothing else than delayed expenditures. So that means that we're willing to set some money aside today. We're willing to save today, so that way when we retired and we go from people at work to money at work, that our money is now going to be working on our behalf. And then obviously we're going to start spending that money that we have saved over the last 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50 years for some of you. So savings is basically delayed expenditures, so therefore you have to be able to treat them that way. The other point in regards to not saving enough is that if you really want to do a proper job in your savings program, you have to be able to save at least 15% of your after-tax income regularly. So if you're making $100 a week, and after tax you have a net of $90, you have to save 15% of those $90, not 15% of your $100. For those of you that work for a company that provide a qualified plan, i.e. a SEP or a simple or a 401k, or if you happen to be self-employed and you provide a 401k to yourself and your family as well, you may want to save on a pre-tax basis. But after you finish saving on a pre-tax basis, I do encourage all of you that your net after-tax income, that you take 15% of that income as well and set it aside for future retirement expenses and expenditures from a business perspective. Also, I think it's important to note, and this is a calculation that all of you should be doing, is you should understand the rule of 72 and the rule of 115. The rule of 72 basically says that if you take the interest rate that you're getting on an annual basis and you divide that by 72, then that will tell you how many years it will take for your retirement savings to double. So let me give you just a simple example. If you're earning 10% on your retirement savings, you divide 10% by 72, and it basically says that your money will double every 7.2 years. The rule of 115 would basically say to you, how many years will it take for your money to triple? So you say you take the same 10%. If you are earning 10%, and I'm just giving you the 10% figure as a number to make it simpler, and then obviously you take that 10% and you divide it by 115, and it will tell you how long will take for your money to triple from a business perspective. So those are formulas that you should be able to feel comfortable with, and that you should be able to use on an ongoing basis, because when you start saving, the numbers may not mean that much, but when you get to the stages of your life where you have, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 saved, then it is very, very important for you to understand the savings rate and how long will it take before your money would either double or triple in the future. Now, the second deadly sin would be taking out too much too early. So the question is, well, does it make sense for you to retire at 62 versus age 70? Obviously, the longer you can wait to retire, the more susceptible you're going to have in having a more successful retirement. And the reason for that is that if you retire at 70, and I'm just picking a number for the sake of picking a number, as opposed to age 62, then that means that you would have had an additional 8 years of putting money away for retirement, having that money compounding on your behalf, and having that done for you for an additional 8 years before you start dipping into your savings and or your retirement distributions in order to mitigate your retirement life for the future and for the rest of your life, not only for you but also for your family as well. Now, retiring at 62 versus 65, 66, age 70 is based on a lot of issues that we don't have the time to discuss today. How much money have you set aside? What kind of retirement income are you looking for? Are you going to have guaranteed pensions? Do you work for an employer that provides a pension on your behalf? What's going to be the size of your Social Security benefits? What are your current expenses? Are you thinking about maybe living outside the United States? So all those things need to be taken into consideration in order for you to avoid taking out too much money too early. Another thing is what is known as a 4% rule. Usually the 4% rule, when it was first put together, basically said that you were going to be investing 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds. So you're going to have a fairly good bond and stock mix. And if you did that, then it should provide 30 years of retirement income if you were to retire, let's say, at age 65. So that means that meant that if you retired 65 and you had a 60-40 split and you were able to withdraw 4% of your retirement assets every single year, then you were going to have income for the next 30 years of your life or through age 95. Now, the challenge with the rule is that, number one, it was devised and put together by a study during the 1990s. Now, as you all know, the market was doing extremely well during the 1990s. But then obviously we suffered two major declines in 2001, 2002, and then 2007 and 2008. So for many of you that are now entering retirement, that 4% rule may no longer be apropos. Now, the 4% rule should be a gauge, not a principle. So that means, again, depending on the quality of your assets and depending on the amount of money that you have set aside for retirement, and also depending on how long you think you're going to be living in retirement and your expenses, then that should determine whether perhaps if you retire at 62, you may not be able to take more than 2% of your retirement assets. If you retire at age 70, you may be able to take more than the 4%. You may be able to take 5 or 6%. So it all depends on the timing of retirement, what are your assets doing at that point in time. But I think that if you use a 4% rule of thumb, and then work from there, then I think that should be a good gauge for you to move forward. So think of it this way. If you have $1 million portfolio and you use a 4% distribution rate or the 4% rule, then that means that $1 million portfolio is generating $40,000 of annual income to you and your family every year. Now, the third deadly sin that I want to talk to you about today would be the wrong order of distribution. And that means, the fire, ready, aim versus ready, aim, fire. If all of us went to a rifle range and instead of getting ready, then aiming for the target and then firing, if we did it the other way around, where we just got to the firing range, got the rifle, and then we fired, ready, and then we aim, the probability that we were going to hit the target in the fire, ready, aim example would be slim to none. So therefore, when you get into the distribution stages, when you go from accumulation to distribution, or as I normally say, when you get to the summit of Mount Everest, your retirement Mount Everest, and you're going to start coming down that mountain, remember, the rules of engagement totally change when you go from accumulation to distribution. So when it comes to the wrong order of distribution, you have to understand and you have to conceive that not all income is created equal. So you have to take a proper distribution from your taxable, tax-deferred, and tax-free buckets in order to mitigate some of the issues that you're going to have to deal with when it comes to your retirement distribution assets. Also, the reason why having the right order of distribution as opposed to the wrong order of distribution is that if you do it the right way, then you're not going to have any negative impact on your provisional income calculations. So that means that your Medicare premium is not going to go up in retirement. That means that your Social Security benefits are not going to be taxed in retirement, because otherwise they could be taxed 50% or 85% of those benefits will be taxed. And if they get taxed, then chances are you may run out of money before out of life by anywhere between 5 to 8 years sooner than expected, because of the fact that if you have to pay taxes on your Social Security benefits, you're going to have to plug that hole somewhere. So therefore, most Americans, what they do is they take additional assets out of their retirement accounts in order to plug the hole, and then that forces a faster depletion and a faster distribution of those retirement assets. So you must be very careful at taking money in the right order and for the right reasons when it comes to retirement. Now, the fourth deadly sin that I want to mention today is not having any principal protection of your assets, meaning that avoiding portfolio insurance may force the wrongful distribution at less than optimum time. So that means that you may be taking the wrong distribution of assets at less than optimum time. So that means that if the market is heading south, as the market is being corrected, and you don't have portfolio insurance, you may actually have to invade assets that are losing value every single year in order to maintain your standard of living. So principal protection provides a smooth landing during a volatile and or a downturning market. So if you have a portion of your assets in a principal protection program, and we've talked about some of those in the past, then you're going to have a smoother landing, because you're going to have a portfolio parachute assigned to each and every one of your assets that is going to alleviate the loss of principal during retirement from a business perspective. Now, the lack of principal protection will deplete retirement assets anywhere between, and this is very important for all of us, so I do want to repeat this point once again. Lack of protection or principal protection depletes retirement assets between 8 and 16 years sooner than expected. So if you happen to retire at a point in time in which the market is having negative returns for multiple years at a time, you may actually run out of money 8 to 16 years sooner than if you enter retirement at a time where your retirement assets for the first few years were receiving a positive return as opposed to a negative return. Now, because of the fact that none of us know what the stock market is going to be doing, what the volatility will be at the point in time that we retire, then it would be apropos, it would be extremely important to make certain that you set aside some kind of a portfolio insurance on your retirement assets in order to mitigate those potential losses at some point in time in the future. Now, I would also argue that a large portion of your retirement assets must provide principal protection and also guaranteed income for life. You know, I've been doing this for about 30 years, and I have a lot of clients that I have helped and still helping through retirement. And I can tell you that 100% of all my retirees would want more guaranteed income in retirement, and would want more principal guaranteed, so therefore they can sleep better at night. At the end of the day, when you're in retirement, you want to be able to enjoy your life. You want to be able to spend time with your family. You want to be able to travel, and you want to be able to relax and not have to worry about running out of money before you run out of life. You don't want to be worried about volatility and what the market is doing today, tomorrow, and the next day. You don't want to worry about where your next paycheck or income check is going to come from. You know, whether it is your guaranteed income or your play income. The more guaranteed assets that you have in retirement, the more guaranteed cash flow that you have in retirement, the better off your retirement life is going to be. Point number 5, or the 5th deadly sin of retirement out of the 8 that I will be touching upon today, is underestimating your healthcare costs in retirement. And this is something that is happening to 100% of Americans today. And I'll tell you this because I experience it every day. Whenever I bring in a new client to the firm and we do a complete audit, you know, we have a discussion about all these issues. And many a times, it is the first time when I talk about the cost of healthcare in the retirement, it is the first time that many of the clients that I engage at first have ever heard any other advisor discussing the challenges of retirement and the impact of healthcare cost in retirement. As a matter of fact, I just read a 2018 retirement analysis that was put together, which basically estimated that a healthy couple in their mid-60s may need to budget anywhere between $250,000 and $500,000 for their health care expenses. Yes, you heard me right, and I hate to tell you this, but it is true. Because of the fact that Americans are living a lot longer today, That means that you're going to have to pay for your healthcare expenses a lot longer. So you need to be able to have a portfolio of at least $250,000 to $500,000 set aside in order to pay for these healthcare expenses. And what do they include? Well, a number of them. Medicare premiums, supplemental insurance premiums, because Medicare, for the most part, is only going to cover 80% of your medical expenses. So you're going to need supplemental plans in order to offset the additional 20%, sometimes even more than that. You're going to have to cover your copays. You're going to have to cover other out-of-pocket medical expenses that none of us have forecasted up until this point in time. So one of the challenges that I have with many of my clients when they come to see me is, and they would say, Bert, I was thinking about retiring in another year or so, and it does appear now that I'm going to have to work a lot longer based on these numbers that you're putting together for me. Now, I do hate to be the bearer of bad news, but my job is to save my clients from themselves. And many a times the reason why I have to save them from themselves is not because they don't want to do the better for themselves and their families, but it is because of lack of education. Now, they do have the ability to go on the internet and pull all kinds of information, but as I always say, although Americans have more information available today than ever before, these same Americans are worse off today than they've ever been. And the reason for that is that information without education always leads to failure. So when I educate clients and I have my clients look at their assets through a telescope as opposed to a microscope, they start to see all of the issues and concerns, and they're going to start to identify these deadly sins that they need to plan for prior to retirement. The other issue that is very critical is the cost of long-term care is actually increasing at 3 times the rate of inflation. And that brings me to deadly sin number 6, and which is ignoring the long-term care cost of retirement. Now, number 5 was underestimating your health care cost in retirement, but now number 6 is also ignoring the long-term care costs in retirement. And we have actually had other podcasts in which not only did we identify the cost of long-term care in the future, but also how to mitigate those costs properly and efficiently from a business perspective. Now, I read another 2018 retirement analysis which also estimated that approximately 70 to 75% of healthy couples in retirement will need long-term care at some point in time in the future. And the reason is simple. If you're husband and wife and you're healthy and you're 65 years of age, you have to be able to plan for 3 decades in retirement. And what do I call those decades? Well, I call them the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. So between 65 and 75, those are the go-go years. Between 75 and 85, those are the slow-go years. And then between the ages of 85 and that point in time when you pass on, those are the no-go years. And you have to be able to plan for those 3 decades. Now, because of the fact that people are living longer today, that means that they're more susceptible to, long-term care issues in the future. So again, husband and wife, healthy, age 65 today, there's a 70 to a 75% probability that one of them is going to have a need for long-term care. And chances are that it's going to be the female, but it could be anyone in the family. So you need to be able to plan accordingly, because if you have to mitigate those expenses in retirement, then you're going to have to invade and you're going to have to deplete your retirement assets at a faster pace than you would have had otherwise. So you need to be able to plan accordingly. So that would be the 6th deadly sin of retirement, ignoring long-term care costs when it comes to your retirement assets. The 7th deadly sin would be mishandling your retirement date. And this is something that just happened to one of my clients a few months back. And this is something that I discuss with each and every one of my clients when we engage in retirement planning. Number one would be leaving money on the table by retiring too soon. If you're still healthy and you're still working and you still enjoy what you do, why would you want to drop 10 and punt, as they say in football, and walk away from a viable paycheck? You may want to think through those things. You may want to wait a little bit longer. You may want to maybe reduce. Maybe you do want to retire from full-time, but you want to re-engage and stay active as a part-time employee for the same company. The other thing that is very critical in handling the sin of mishandling your retirement date is that, what you're retiring to is more important than what you're retiring from. And this is something that is very, very critical, because although many of the clients, and the fact that I'm a retirement strategist, a vast majority of the clients that I engage, for the first time that come to see me, they're either a year away from retirement, that could be 5 years away from retirement. Most of them are within, 10 years away from retirement. But, when they come see me because they have a due date, or they have a deadline date that they have set for themselves, we need to have some discussions, because it's not so much where you're retiring from, is what you're retiring to. Do you have a lifestyle retirement plan? And that would include, why are you retiring? What are you retiring to? Where are you retiring? And how are you retiring? There are a lot of issues that need to be taken into consideration before you pull the trigger on your retirement date. How does your spouse feel about retirement? Does she want to do the same things that you want to do? What if you want to travel and your spouse does not? Is that going to create a conflict in your retirement life? Those are issues that need to be taken into consideration. Will he or she retire at the same time? I have a case with one of my best clients. He's 10 years older than his wife. And by the way, I have several of those that I can talk about, but he's 10 years older. So that means that, he's in his early 70s. She's in her early 60s. So she's definitely not going to be retiring right now. So that means that he's retiring all by himself. How long is he going to be retiring for before he decides to do something? Because, the honey-do list may be over and done with after a year, maybe 2 years. And then in this situation, the wife is continuing to work. So now he may just decide to go back to work because now he's bored sitting at home. He can't travel as much because obviously, his wife is working, so she doesn't have the time to be able to travel as much as he would want to. So these are things, and these are conversations that if you're married, you need to start having with your wife or your husband or your significant other, because they all going to make an impact as to how you retire in the future. What are your travel plans? What are your relocation plans? Are you going to retire and live somewhere else in the United States? Or are you going to live somewhere outside the United States? Another thing to consider is that, if you retire past the age of 70 and a half and then decide to go back to work, you must continue to take required minimum distributions from your past employer's 401k. So even if you go back to work, the new employer may allow you to, continue to put money away in your 401ks and not have to take that money out because you have the still at work exception for your current employer. But for the past employer, since you retired from your past employer, although you went back to work, you still must take your RMDs from the previous employer, whether you want to or need to. So you have to be very careful about that. And then last but not least, and the eighth deadly sin of retirement is not having a retirement coach. And this is one that I live every single day, because I am a retirement coach. I am a retirement distribution strategist. And the way that I look at it is that all great athletes have a coach. Whether you're Tiger Woods or Michael Jordan or Wayne Gretzky, you can name hundreds of them. Just about every single professional athlete, they all have a coach. Now, obviously, Tiger Woods is one of the best at hitting a golf ball. So you would think, well, why does he need a golf coach? Because a golf coach can see things that Tiger Woods cannot see while he's swinging a golf club. So those are things that are very, very important. The same thing applied to Michael Jordan and Wayne Gretzky and so forth. Coaches obviously do have the ability to identify retirement pitfalls quicker than you could. Why? Because we've done it many a times. I have retired over 70 times already. That means that every time one of my clients retire, and I assist I assist him or her in their retirement distribution planning, I'm actually retiring with them. So I'm able to see the pitfalls a mile away. So if you have a coach, if you have a retirement coach, they're going to be able to see those retirement pitfalls a lot quicker than you could, because they have already done it many a times before. Also, retirement coaches and tax planners have retirement roadmaps. So they're going to be able to guide you in the right direction, because they're going to follow a roadmap that's going to help your life get better during your retirement years. Now, some of us, like myself, provide what is known as a tactical retirement blueprint for execution purposes. So whenever a client comes to see me, and we are in the process of putting together their retirement distribution plan, then I put together a tactical retirement blueprint that is going to take into consideration all of these 8 deadly sins that we've talked about today, but it's also going to emphasize taxation, inflation, stock market volatility. Is going to pay attention to the 4 major risks that Americans are facing today in retirement. The risk of dying too soon, living too long, living with a disability, and living with eroding factors like taxes, inflation, stock market volatility, interest rate volatility, propensity to consume, lawsuits, and the like. So, if you're dealing and working with a retirement coach, then, you're doing the right thing. Now, for those of you that may have additional questions concerning some of these topics that we've covered today, please, by all means, feel free to reach out. Number one, I would appreciate if you can subscribe to my podcast. We're getting a lot of downloads, so that's a good thing. That means that, people are paying attention and they're listening to us on a weekly basis. You can always reach me at area code 786-766-1042. And you can also email me at Bert, B-E-R-T, at GablesTaxGroup.com. And remember, we're the family of Cambridge. We have Cambridge, Camelot, and Gables Tax Planning Group, and the 3 firms that we control have the ability to do 3 different things or 3 different jobs in order to mitigate your retirement needs, not only now, but for many, many years to come. And then my final thought is that my goal for each and every one of you, as I do every single week, is to kind of change the way that you see things. Because when you start changing the way that you see things, the things that you see change. So again, thanks very much for giving me a few minutes of your time this week. Again, I hope all of you enjoyed your Memorial Day weekend and that you really had a great time in the company of family and friends. And I look forward to talking to you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.